The giant space station hung in the darkness like a glowing city. Inside its metal halls, the greatest minds in the galaxy gathered once again. They came from every corner of known space, their ships docking one by one at the massive station. Dr. Zentara walked through the corridors, her 6 arms carrying data tablets and research files. Her blue skin showed the stress patterns that all Altarians displayed when frustrated. She had worked on this problem for over 50 years of her life. Her grandmother had worked on it before her. Her great-grandmother too. The problem was simple to explain but impossible to solve. On a dead planet called Kepler 442b, explorers had found something amazing. It was a crystal the size of a small building, perfectly clear and beautiful. But this crystal was not natural. Someone had made it long ago. The crystal was covered in symbols. Millions of them. They moved and changed and shifted across its surface like living things. Sometimes they glowed bright blue. Sometimes they turned red or gold or silver. The symbols seemed to tell a story, but no one could read it. The people who made this crystal were called the architects. They had lived across many star systems once. They had built amazing cities and incredible machines. But they were all gone now, dead for thousands of years. Only their crystal remained. Zentara entered the great meeting hall. The room was enormous, with seats for over 1,000 beings. Representatives from 47 different species sat in groups, talking quietly among themselves. The Valkyrie delegation sat in the front rows, their large heads bent over mathematical equations. The Centaurians floated in their water tanks, their tentacles moving in complex patterns as they discussed quantum theories. At the center of the hall stood a hologram of the crystal. It looked exactly like the real thing, complete with moving symbols. Scientists had spent centuries studying every detail of this artifact. "Welcome, colleagues," announced Director Kethmos, a tall being with gray skin and 4 eyes. "This is our 847th meeting about the Kepler Codex. We have new theories to discuss today." Zentara stood up when her name was called. She walked to the speaking platform, her research files floating behind her on antigrav units. The hall grew quiet. "Fellow scientists," she began, "I must report another failure." Her voice carried sadness and frustration. "My team has spent the last 10 years working on Pattern Recognition Protocol 7042. We believed that the symbols followed a mathematical sequence based on prime numbers and stellar coordinates." She activated her holographic display. Complex charts and graphs filled the air above the audience. "We tested every combination. We used the most powerful computers in the galaxy. We even built quantum processors specifically for this task." The charts showed endless streams of data, all leading to the same result: nothing. "The symbols respond to our presence," Zentara continued. "When we approach the crystal, they change. When we touch it, they move faster. When we speak near it, they shift colors. But we cannot understand what they mean. The pattern seems random, but we know it cannot be random. The architects were too advanced for random symbols." An old Valkyrie scientist stood up in the front row. His name was Professor Thalkin, and he was famous for solving the mathematical mysteries of 3 different dead civilizations. "Dr. Zentara," he said in his deep voice, "have you considered that perhaps the symbols represent emotional states rather than information?" Zentara nodded. "We tested that theory 40 years ago, Professor. We exposed the crystal to beings experiencing different emotions: joy, anger, fear, curiosity. The symbols did change, but we found no consistent pattern. A happy Centaurian and a happy Valkyrie produce completely different symbol responses." Another scientist spoke up from the back of the hall. This was Dr. Yinthara, a specialist in ancient languages. "What about the possibility that each symbol represents a different concept in architect philosophy?" We know they were a deeply spiritual people. Also tested, Zenthara replied. We have identified over 47 million different symbols on the crystal surface. Even if each symbol represented a unique concept, that would suggest a language more complex than any known civilization has ever created. And the symbols keep changing. New ones appear. Old ones disappear. It's as if the crystal is alive. The hall filled with murmuring voices. Scientists discussed theories with their neighbors. Some argued about mathematical approaches. Others debated philosophical interpretations. Director Kethmos raised his hand for silence. We have tried many approaches over the centuries, he said. Mathematical analysis, linguistic interpretation, quantum resonance scanning, telepathic probing, even attempts to recreate architect brain patterns using artificial intelligence. Nothing has worked. He paused and looked around the room. That is why we have decided to try something new. We will invite fresh perspectives from newly contacted species. Perhaps minds that think differently can see what we have missed. A Centaurian representative floated forward in her water tank. You mean the primitive species from the outer rim? The ones who just learned to travel faster than light. They are not primitive, Kethmos corrected. They are simply different. The Zephyrians, the Corvani, the humans. Each species has unique ways of solving problems. The humans especially have shown interesting abilities in pattern recognition and creative thinking. Many scientists in the hall made sounds of disbelief. The humans had only been part of galactic civilization for 20 years. Their technology was basic compared to most species. Their lifespans were short. Their minds seemed simple and emotional rather than logical and analytical. But Zenthara remembered something her grandmother had told her long ago. Sometimes, the old Altarian had said, the answer comes not from thinking harder, but from thinking differently. I agree with the director's decision, Zenthara announced. We have exhausted our current approaches. Perhaps it is time for new ideas, even from unexpected sources. The meeting continued for several more hours. Scientists presented their latest theories and research results. All of them led to the same conclusion. The Kepler Codex remained as mysterious as ever. As the meeting ended, Zenthara looked one more time at the holographic crystal floating in the center of the hall. Its symbols continued to move and change, beautiful and haunting. Somewhere in those patterns lay the knowledge of an entire civilization. The architects had been master builders, great philosophers, and incredible scientists. They had left behind this gift for future generations to find. But after 300 years of study by the galaxy's greatest minds, the gift remained unopened. The symbols kept their secrets, dancing endlessly across the crystal surface, like a language that no one could speak. Soon, representatives from the newer species would arrive at the station. Maybe one of them would see something that everyone else had missed. Maybe the answer was simpler than anyone imagined. Or maybe the Kepler Codex would remain forever silent, a beautiful mystery that would outlive them all. The human transport ship was small compared to the other vessels docked at the research station. Dr. Sarah Chun pressed her face against the small window as her ship approached the massive structure. She had never seen anything like it in her life. Sarah was 35 years old, with brown hair tied back in a simple ponytail and curious dark eyes. She wore the standard uniform of Earth's Xenarchaeology Department, a simple blue jumpsuit with her name and credentials printed on the chest. Compared to the elaborate robes and environmental suits of other species, she looked very plain. The docking process took an hour. Sarah's ship captain, a friendly man named Rodriguez, helped her with her single bag of belongings. Good luck out there, Doc, he said. Show them what humans can do. Sarah nodded nervously. She had only been studying alien artifacts for 5 years. Before that, she had worked on ancient human civilizations. Back on Earth, She had discovered temples in South America and decoded old manuscripts in libraries. But this was different. This was the greatest mystery in the galaxy. The airlock opened with a soft hiss. Sarah stepped into the research station and immediately felt overwhelmed. The corridor was huge, with a ceiling 3 times taller than anything on Earth. Strange beings walked past her, talking in languages she could not understand. Some had multiple arms, some had tentacles, and some floated in containers filled with liquid. A translation device in her ear helped her understand the basic meaning of conversations around her. But the emotions and attitudes were clear without any translation. Many of the beings looked at her with curiosity. Some seemed annoyed. A few appeared almost angry. "You must be Dr. Chen," said a voice behind her. Sarah turned to see Dr. Zenthora approaching. The Altarian was much taller than Sarah, with blue skin and 6 arms. Her manner was polite but formal. "Yes, that's me," Sarah replied. "Thank you for allowing me to join your research project." Zenthara's expression showed the Altarian equivalent of a smile. "We are interested in fresh perspectives. Your species has shown some unusual problem-solving abilities. Perhaps you will see something we have missed." As they walked through the station, Zenthara explained the research facilities. "We have the most advanced computers in the galaxy here," she said, pointing to a room filled with glowing machines. "We have quantum analyzers, pattern recognition systems, and artificial intelligence networks that can process information faster than any biological mind." Sarah nodded, trying to look impressed. But secretly, she felt intimidated. How could her simple human brain compete with such amazing technology? They passed laboratories where teams of scientists worked on different aspects of the mystery. In one room, Volcari mathematicians covered walls with equations that hurt Sarah's eyes to look at. In another, Centauran researchers sent telepathic probes toward a small sample of crystal material. "We have been very systematic," Zenthara explained. "Every approach has been carefully planned and executed. We have tested mathematical theories, linguistic models, quantum field interactions, and consciousness resonance patterns. We have tried everything that science suggests might work." Sarah listened carefully, but something bothered her about what she heard. It all sounded very logical and organized, but also very cold and distant. "Have you tried any approaches that aren't scientific?" she asked. Zenthora stopped walking and looked at Sarah with confusion. "What do you mean by that question?" "Well," Sarah said carefully, "sometimes old human artifacts weren't meant to be studied scientifically. Sometimes they were meant to be experienced, like art or music or stories." The Altarian's expression showed polite disagreement. "Dr. Chun, the architects were a highly advanced technological civilization. They built machines that could travel between stars and create artificial worlds. Their crystal artifact must contain technical or scientific information. It cannot simply be art." Sarah nodded, but she wasn't convinced. In her work on Earth, she had learned that even the most advanced human civilizations mixed practical information with cultural meaning. A technical manual might also be a religious text. A star map might also be a poem. Finally, they reached the main research chamber. Sarah gasped when she saw the real Kepler Codex for the first time. It was enormous, rising from the floor to the high ceiling like a beautiful tower. Its surface sparkled with moving symbols that shifted and changed in colors she had never seen before. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Yes," agreed Zenthara. "But beauty is not our concern. We need to understand its information content." Professor Thalken, the elderly Volcari mathematician, approached them. His large head contained a brain 3 times bigger than Sarah's, and his eyes showed the accumulated wisdom of 2 centuries of study. "Dr. Chun," he said in his deep voice, "we have analyzed this artifact using mathematical principles that your species has not yet discovered. We have applied quantum theories that are beyond current human understanding. What could you possibly contribute to our research? Sarah felt her face grow warm with embarrassment. I don't know, Professor. I just thought maybe a different perspective might help. Different how? Asked Dr. Yinthara, the language specialist who had joined their group. We have representatives from 47 species here. We have studied every known approach to symbol interpretation. We have consulted with philosophers, artists, musicians, and even mystics from across the galaxy. Sarah looked around at all the serious faces staring at her. These beings had devoted their entire lives to this mystery. Some had worked on it for centuries. Their combined knowledge was vast beyond anything she could imagine. But she noticed something else. They all looked tired and frustrated and defeated. Maybe that's the problem, Sarah said quietly. What do you mean? Zenthara asked. Everyone here is trying so hard to solve the mystery that you might be missing something simple. Sometimes when I got stuck on Earth artifacts, the answer came when I stopped trying to be smart and just started paying attention. Professor Thawkin made a sound that might have been laughter. Dr. Chun, we have been paying attention for 3 centuries. Every symbol movement has been recorded. Every color change has been analyzed. Every pattern shift has been studied. There is nothing that we have not paid attention to. Sarah walked closer to the crystal. As she approached, the symbols near her began to change. They shifted from blue to green to gold, moving faster than before. Has anyone tried just talking to it? She asked. The question created a moment of complete silence in the chamber. Sarah could hear the soft humming of the research equipment and the distant conversations from other parts of the station. But none of the scientists spoke. Talking to it? Zenthara finally repeated. Dr. Chun, it is a crystal. It does not have consciousness. It cannot hear or understand speech. But it responds to presence, Sarah pointed out. You said so yourself. When people get close, it changes. When they touch it, it moves faster. Maybe it's trying to communicate, not just display information. Dr. Yinthara shook her head. We have tested vocal input extensively. We have spoken to it in hundreds of languages, including reconstructed architect speech patterns. Nothing produced meaningful responses. Sarah nodded, but she kept looking at the crystal. The symbols continued to dance and shift, almost like they were alive. Almost like they were waiting for something. What if you're speaking the wrong language? She asked. What if it doesn't want to hear languages at all? The scientists exchanged glances. Sarah could see in their expressions that they thought she was naive and foolish. But she had learned something important during her years, studying human artifacts. Sometimes the most obvious answer was also the correct answer. Sometimes people made things complicated when they were really simple. She would find out soon enough if the same rule applied to alien mysteries. Sarah spent her first 3 days on the station, trying to understand the scientific approaches that had already been tried. She read research reports until her eyes hurt. She watched demonstrations of quantum analysis equipment. She listened to presentations about mathematical theories that made her head spin. The other scientists were polite to her, but she could sense their impatience. They answered her questions carefully, but she knew they thought she was wasting their time. How could someone from such a young species contribute anything meaningful to their work? On the 4th day, Sarah decided to try something different. Instead of studying the research, she would study the crystal itself. She asked permission to spend time alone in the main chamber, just observing. What exactly do you plan to observe? Asked Dr. Zenthara. Every detail of the crystal's behavior has been recorded and analyzed thousands of times. I know, Sarah said, but I want to see it for myself. Sometimes you notice different things when you're not looking for something specific. Zenthara looked doubtful, but she agreed. Very well. But please, do not touch anything. The crystal is extremely valuable, and we cannot risk damage. Sarah entered the chamber early in the morning shift. The lights were dimmed, and the crystal glowed softly in the half-darkness. She pulled up a simple chair and sat down about 10 feet away from it. Then she just watched. The symbols moved constantly across the crystal surface. They appeared and disappeared in complex patterns. Sometimes they clustered together in groups. Sometimes they spread out across the entire surface. Sometimes they moved slowly like drifting clouds. Sometimes they raced around like excited animals. After an hour, Sarah noticed something interesting. When she first sat down, feeling nervous and uncertain, the symbols near her had been sharp and angular, like broken glass. But as she relaxed and became more comfortable, they had gradually changed to softer, rounder shapes. She decided to test this observation. She thought about something that made her angry, the way some of the scientists had dismissed her ideas. Immediately, the symbols closest to her became jagged and harsh-looking, with bright red colors. Then she thought about something peaceful, the garden behind her childhood home on Earth. The symbols shifted to gentle curves and soft green and blue colors. Sarah felt excitement growing in her chest. The crystal was responding to her emotions, not just her presence. But this wasn't new information. The research reports had mentioned emotional responses. What was different about what she was seeing? She continued watching for several more hours. Scientists came and went in the chamber, working on their various projects. Sarah observed how the crystal responded to each of them. When Professor Thalken approached with his usual serious expression, focused on mathematical calculations, the symbols became geometric patterns in cold blue and silver colors. When Dr. Yinthara came near, thinking about linguistic structures, the symbols arranged themselves in what looked like text, but in no recognizable language. When a young Centaurian student entered the chamber, floating in her water tank with obvious excitement about seeing the crystal for the first time, the symbols burst into brilliant colors and fluid, dancing movements. They seemed almost joyful. But when Dr. Zenthara approached, carrying the weight of 50 years of failed research and growing frustration, the symbols became chaotic and confused-looking, shifting rapidly between different patterns as if they couldn't decide what to display. Sarah began to understand something important. The crystal wasn't just responding to emotions. It was responding to the intentions and attitudes of the people near it. When someone approached it as a puzzle to be solved, it behaved like a puzzle. When someone approached it with curiosity and wonder, it responded with beauty and movement. When someone approached it with frustration and determination to force an answer, it became confused and unresponsive. She thought about her years studying human artifacts on Earth. The best discoveries had never come from aggressive analysis. They had come from patience, from trying to understand the minds of the people who had created the objects. Successful archaeology wasn't about imposing modern ideas on ancient creations. It was about connecting with the thoughts and feelings of people who had long ago. What if the architects had designed their crystal the same way? What if it wasn't meant to be decoded like a computer program? What if it was meant to be understood like a conversation? Sarah stood up and walked closer to the crystal. As she approached, the symbols began to change, becoming brighter and more active. But she noticed something else now. The symbols weren't random. They were trying to match her state of mind. When she felt curious, they formed patterns that suggested questions, spirals and open curves that seemed to invite exploration. When she felt peaceful, they became steady and rhythmic like a heartbeat. When she felt confused, they became scattered and uncertain. It was as if the crystal was trying to speak her emotional language. Sarah remembered something from her studies of human communication. Before people developed complex spoken languages, they had communicated through gestures, expressions, and emotional signals. Maybe the architects had created something similar, a form of communication that worked through empathy rather than symbols. She decided to try an experiment. Instead of trying to read the crystal symbols, she would try to communicate her own thoughts to it. Sarah placed her hand gently on the crystal surface. It felt warm and smooth, with a slight vibration like a purring cat. The symbols under her hand began to glow brighter. "Hello," she said softly. "My name is Sarah. I'm here because I want to understand you." The response was immediate and dramatic. The symbols across the entire crystal surface suddenly organized themselves into clearer, more coherent patterns. Colors became brighter and more distinct. Movements became more purposeful and less chaotic. Sarah felt her heart racing. Something was definitely happening. But she forced herself to stay calm and continue the experiment. "I don't want to solve you like a puzzle," she continued, speaking to the crystal as if it were a person. "I want to know who you are and what you're trying to say." The symbols began to shift in a way that reminded Sarah of someone nodding in agreement. Patterns formed that looked almost like faces, friendly and welcoming. Colors flowed in warm, inviting shades. For several minutes, Sarah continued talking to the crystal, telling it about herself, her work, her journey to the station. The crystal's responses became more and more animated, as if it was becoming excited about finally having someone to talk to. Then the chamber door opened, and Dr. Zentara entered with several other scientists. They stopped in amazement when they saw what was happening. The crystal was displaying patterns and colors unlike anything they had seen before. "Dr. Chen," Zentara said in a whisper, "what did you do?" Sarah kept her hand on the crystal surface. She could feel something like happiness radiating from it. "I think I figured out what it wants," she said. "It doesn't want to be studied. It wants to be understood. It wants to communicate." Professor Thalkin stepped forward, his expression skeptical. "Dr. Chen, you cannot possibly believe that this artifact has consciousness. It is a storage device, not a living being." "Maybe," Sarah said. "But maybe the architects designed it to act like a living being. Maybe they understood that the best way to share knowledge isn't to hide it in codes and puzzles. Maybe they knew that real understanding only happens when minds connect with each other." As she spoke, the crystal symbols began to organize themselves in new ways. Mathematical equations appeared, but they were simple ones that Sarah could recognize. Star charts formed, showing clear pictures of solar systems. Text began to appear in symbols that looked almost familiar. The crystal was adapting itself to her level of understanding, starting with simple concepts and gradually building toward more complex ones. It was teaching her the way a patient teacher might work with a student. "Incredible," breathed Dr. Yindara. "It's creating a communication protocol in real time, adjusting to her cognitive patterns." Sarah smiled as she watched the crystal continue its patient efforts to bridge the gap between her mind and the knowledge of the architects. After 3 centuries of failed attempts to crack a code, the answer had turned out to be much simpler. Just reach out and try to make a friend. Word of Sarah's breakthrough spread through the research station like wildfire. Within an hour, the main chamber was filled with scientists from every species represented at the station. They crowded around the crystal, watching in amazement as it continued to display organized, meaningful patterns. Dr. Zentara stood beside Sarah, her 6 arms moving nervously as she recorded everything on multiple devices. "This is unprecedented," she whispered. "The crystal has never maintained coherent patterns for more than a few minutes. It has been displaying organized information for over an hour now." Sarah kept her hand on the crystal surface, feeling the warm vibration that seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. The symbols under her palm shifted and flowed like living water, responding to her thoughts and emotions in ways that felt almost natural now. "It's learning about me," Sarah explained to the gathering crowd. "Every time I think about something, It tries to show me related information. When I thought about my home planet, it showed me star charts. When I wondered about mathematics, it displayed equations. It's trying to teach me the way I would teach someone else. Professor Thawken pushed through the crowd, his large eyes fixed on the crystal surface. Dr. Chun, can you ask it specific questions? Can you direct its responses toward particular areas of knowledge? Sarah nodded. She had already discovered that she could guide the crystal's displays by focusing her thoughts on specific topics. What would you like to know about? The architects themselves, said Dr. Yintura, who had joined them. We have so many questions about their civilization, their technology, their disappearance. Sarah concentrated on her curiosity about the architects. Immediately, the crystal's entire surface began to change. The symbols organized themselves into what looked like historical records. Images formed showing tall, graceful beings with elongated limbs and large, intelligent eyes. The architects had been beautiful people, with an obvious love for art and knowledge. The crystal showed their cities, vast structures that combined technology with natural beauty. Gardens grew on buildings that reached toward the sky. Rivers flowed through urban centers that sparkled with lights and energy. Transportation systems moved people and goods without any visible pollution or damage to the environment. They were environmentalists, Sarah observed. They built their civilization to work with nature, not against it. More images appeared, showing architects, scientists, and philosophers working together in great libraries and laboratories. Unlike the research station, where each species worked separately on their own theories, the architects seemed to collaborate constantly. They shared ideas freely and built on each other's discoveries. Look at this, said Dr. Zenthara, pointing to one section of the crystal. They're showing us their technological achievements. The crystal displayed incredible machines, ships that could travel between galaxies, devices that could manipulate matter at the atomic level, computers that seemed to think and feel like living beings. But all of their technology was designed to help people connect with each other and understand the universe around them. Sarah felt a wave of sadness from the crystal and knew what was coming next. The images shifted to show the decline of architect civilization. Not war or disaster, but something more subtle and tragic. Isolation. As their technology became more advanced, individual architects began to rely less on each other. They could solve problems alone using their machines. They could explore the universe without needing companions. They could access any information without asking questions of their fellow beings. Slowly, over thousands of years, they stopped talking to each other. They stopped collaborating. They stopped sharing their thoughts and feelings. Each architect became like a single point of light in the darkness, brilliant but alone. They lost the ability to connect, Sarah said softly. They became so advanced that they forgot how to be together. The crystal showed the final days of their civilization. Empty cities where individual architects lived in isolation, surrounded by incredible technology, but cut off from the warmth of companionship. They had all the knowledge in the universe, but no one to share it with. Before they died out completely, the remaining architects had created the crystal as a final gift to future civilizations. But they had learned from their mistake. The crystal could not be understood through technology alone. It required the most basic and important skill of all, the ability to reach out to another mind with empathy and understanding. It's a test, realized Professor Thawken. They designed it to only work for species that still remember how to connect with each other. Sarah nodded. And a teaching tool. They want to make sure that what happened to them doesn't happen to us. The crystal's display shifted again, now showing detailed technical information. But it was organized in a way that required cooperation to understand. Mathematical formulas were split across multiple sections, requiring different minds to work together to complete them. Scientific principles were explained through analogies that needed different types of thinking to fully grasp. "This is amazing," said a young Centaurian scientist, her tentacles moving excitedly in her water tank. "Look at this propulsion technology." But the equations only make sense if you combine the mathematical approach with the philosophical concepts shown over there. A Volcari engineer pointed to another section. "And this energy generation system requires both quantum physics and what appears to be artistic principles. No single mind could understand all of it alone." Sarah smiled as she watched the different scientists begin to work together, sharing their interpretations and building on each other's insights. The crystal seemed to pulse with approval as the various species started collaborating in ways they had never done before. "Dr. Chun," said Director Kethmos, who had just arrived in the chamber, "you have achieved something remarkable. But I must ask, how did you know to try this approach? What made you think of communication rather than decryption?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "On Earth, I studied many ancient human civilizations. I learned that people from long ago weren't trying to hide their knowledge from us. They were trying to share it. But they lived in such different times that we had to understand their way of thinking before we could understand their information." She gestured toward the crystal, which continued to display new wonders as more scientists approached it with curiosity rather than analytical aggression. "I think the architects were the same way. They weren't trying to create a puzzle for us to solve. They were trying to have a conversation with us. They wanted to share their knowledge, but only with people who still knew how to listen and respond." Dr. Zenthara looked at the crystal with new understanding. 3 centuries, she said quietly. "We spent 3 centuries trying to break into their vault, when all along they were waiting for us to knock on their door." As if responding to her words, the crystal surface filled with new symbols. These were different from the others. Simpler, warmer, more welcoming. Sarah didn't need any translation to understand their meaning. They looked like the universal expressions of greeting, friendship, and invitation that could be found in every sentient species. The architects were saying hello back, the chamber filled with excited voices as scientists from 47 different species began working together to understand the gift that had been waiting for them all along. And at the center of it all, Sarah kept her hand on the crystal surface, feeling like she was touching the warm, friendly hand of someone who had been waiting a very long time for a friend to visit. 6 months after Sarah's breakthrough, the research station had transformed into something entirely different. Where once there had been separate laboratories for each species, now there were mixed teams working together on shared projects. The rigid hierarchy of academic seniority had given way to collaborative groups where young and old, experienced and novice, worked side by side. Sarah sat in what had once been Conference Room 7, now redesigned as a comfortable meeting space with seating arrangements for all the different body types represented at the station. Around the table sat her new research team, Dr. Zenthara, Professor Thauken, Dr. Yinthara, and representatives from 12 other species. "The crystal has revealed another layer today," announced Zenthara, her blue skin showing the excitement patterns that had become common among the research staff. "It appears to contain detailed information about ecosystem management on a galactic scale." Sarah smiled as she listened to her colleagues discuss their latest discoveries. The architect crystal, as it was now officially called, continued to reveal new knowledge every day. But each revelation required multiple minds working together to fully understand it. The architects had designed their final gift to promote exactly the kind of cooperation that their own civilization had lost. "What's interesting," added Professor Thauken, "is that the crystal seems to prioritize certain types of information based on our current needs. When the Krivani delegation arrived last month with questions about clean energy, it immediately began displaying advanced power generation techniques. Dr. Yinthara nodded in agreement. And when the Zephyrian philosophers asked about consciousness and identity, it showed us architect theories about the nature of thought itself. It's not just sharing information randomly. It's responding to what we need to know. Sarah had become the unofficial liaison between the crystal and the research teams. Her natural ability to connect with it emotionally made her the most effective communicator, but she had also been teaching others how to approach it properly. The key was always the same: curiosity, respect, and genuine desire to understand rather than to conquer. The applications are already changing our civilizations, said Dr. Kenthal, a representative from the Galactic Council who visited the station regularly. The Volcari have implemented new mathematical principles that are revolutionizing their computing systems. The Centaurians are using architect biotechnology to heal diseases that have plagued them for millennia. The Altarians have redesigned their cities using environmental harmony principles. But Sarah knew that the most important change wasn't technological. It was social. Species that had barely cooperated for centuries were now working together on joint projects. The competitive atmosphere of academic research was being replaced by a collaborative spirit that benefited everyone. "What about Earth?" asked Zenthara. "How has your homeworld responded to the discoveries?" Sarah's expression grew thoughtful. "It's been interesting. Some humans are excited about the new technologies and scientific breakthroughs, but others are more interested in the philosophical lessons. The idea that an advanced civilization fell because they stopped connecting with each other has really made people think about our own social problems." She had spent 2 months on Earth, sharing the crystal's lessons with human governments, universities, and research institutions. The response had been mixed, but generally positive. Some groups wanted to immediately implement architect technologies. Others wanted to study the social and philosophical implications more carefully. "There's been a lot of debate about how to apply what we've learned," Sarah continued. "But most people agree that the crystal's main lesson is important. No matter how advanced we become, we need to maintain our connections with each other." The meeting was interrupted by an excited young scientist who burst into the room. He was a Delvian, a species that had only recently joined the galactic community. His small, furry appearance made him look almost like a talking pet, but his intelligence was remarkable. "Dr. Chun," he said breathlessly, "the crystal is doing something new. You need to see this right away." The entire team rushed to the main chamber. When they arrived, they found the crystal displaying patterns unlike anything they had seen before. Instead of showing information about the architects or their technology, it was showing images of the current research station, the scientists working there, and their collaborative efforts. "It's documenting us," said Dr. Yinthara in amazement. "It's recording our work together as if it's creating a new historical record." Sarah approached the crystal and placed her hand on its surface. Immediately, she felt a sense of deep satisfaction and approval flowing from it. The crystal was pleased with what it was seeing: different species working together, sharing knowledge freely, and building on each other's ideas. New symbols appeared under her hand, and Sarah understood their meaning without any need for translation. The crystal was telling them that they had learned its lesson. They had proven that they could maintain their connections while advancing their knowledge. They were not destined to repeat the architect's tragic isolation. "I think," said Sarah slowly, "it's preparing to reveal its final secret." Over the next several hours, the crystal began displaying information that was clearly its most precious: knowledge, the complete philosophical and spiritual teachings of the architect civilization. Not their technology or their science, but their understanding of what it meant to live a meaningful life in the universe. That the teachings were beautiful in their simplicity. They emphasized curiosity over certainty, collaboration over competition, understanding over judgment. They spoke of the importance of maintaining wonder in the face of knowledge and connection in the face of advancement. These aren't just historical documents, observed Professor Thawken. These are guidelines for how to build a civilization that won't destroy itself through its own success. As the crystal finished its final revelation, Sarah felt a shift in its energy. The urgent, almost desperate quality that had characterized its communications was gone. Now it felt peaceful and satisfied, like someone who had finally delivered an important message after waiting a very long time. "I don't think it needs us to study it anymore," Sarah said. "I think its job is finished." Dr. Zenthara looked worried. "Are you saying the crystal will stop working?" "No," Sarah replied. "I think it will keep sharing knowledge with anyone who approaches it with the right attitude. But the urgent part of its mission is complete. It wanted to make sure that future civilizations wouldn't make the same mistakes the architects made. And I think it's satisfied that we've learned that lesson." Over the following weeks, news of the crystal's teachings spread throughout the galaxy. The impact was gradual but profound. Universities began emphasizing collaborative research methods. Governments started implementing policies that encouraged cooperation between species. Young people from different civilizations began studying together and forming friendships that would have been impossible before. Sarah found herself appointed as the first human representative to the Galactic Academic Council, a position that had been created specifically to honor her contribution to galactic knowledge. But she knew that her real achievement wasn't solving the crystal's mystery. It was helping everyone remember something that should never have been forgotten: that the greatest discoveries come not from working alone, but from working together. Years later, when new species were discovered and brought into galactic civilization, they would be introduced to the architect crystal as part of their orientation. They would learn its history and its lessons. And hopefully, they would understand that true advancement meant growing together, not growing apart. The crystal continued to glow in its chamber, patient and welcoming, ready to share its knowledge with anyone who approached it with an open heart and a desire to understand. The architect's final gift had found its purpose, ensuring that their tragic end would become the beginning of something much better for everyone who came after.